Welcome to I Have Something to Say, where unfiltered opinions meet raw authenticity. If you're tired of the same old canned answers and crave genuine conversations about real issues, then you've landed in the right spot. So buckle up for a roller coaster of diverse perspectives. Yours truly, Samí Haiman-Marrero, and my co-host, Chris Majocha, will dive headfirst into topics that impact our daily lives. From the boardrooms to the streets, get ready to hear real people cut through the BS and deliver the discussions you've been waiting for.
I think we're making history. It's the first time that we have everyone on the show with a gender neutral name. And so here we are, Samí, Chris, and our guest, Toni Hunt, the great Toni Hunt, CEO and founder of The American Way. And she's just brilliant. We've had conversations about her consultancy firm that offers frameworks to really combat socioeconomic barriers and deliver equity. But I'll shut up now and just have Toni share with us why start The American Way and call the company that.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you, Sammy and Chris. I'm so glad to be here. I called the company The American Way because of our slogan, which is to propel equity through exposure and barrier elimination. I grew up in that firsthand. That was done for both of my parents. They were given a scholarship from Barnett Bank to attend FAMU, which really changed the trajectory for me and my siblings. And I too received the great generosity and benevolence that our America has to offer. That's given me the experience and the education and the overall expertise that I have today. So in my view, I believe that we live in a great country. We just need to give access to everyone for the greatness that our America stands for.
Yeah, and it's really cool because when we first met, I'm like, the American way, okay, but aren't we constantly talking about how it's broken and it's a system that sucks and is just has to be changed and dismantled altogether? And from your perspective, is that no, it's working just fine. It's just that it works for some people and it doesn't work for others because of different factors, right? Like where you pop into this world and you are born in the wrong zip code, right? Or the wrong zip code. And then it's really about ease of access. And so tell us a little bit about the framework that you stand on when you do your work.
So something that I grew up with hearing by the great women that raised me is you can't get to the how without the why. And so that is our framework at The American Way. What is the why of all of this? In America, I don't think it really matters where you come from. What matters is, are you given the same access as others? And sometimes that access has to be coupled with equity and exposure. And that is the true plight and concern within our communities in America. Some people get that access and some don't. And so how can we mitigate that? How can we fix it to where everyone gets to access America? My dad was in the military, so I've gotten to travel around the world, and what I've noticed is that good or bad, right or wrong, right or left, America is one of the best countries in the world, especially for women. So when you factor that in and you look at it from an economic perspective, and I think that's the other elephant that's in the room, experience doesn't always equate to expertise, right? And so we have a lot of people talking about their experience or their opinion. But when you get an expert who is an economist, and then that economist is a person of color, and then that person of color is also a woman, right? There's a lot of factors there and some edge that I can give on that insight. And then I think another differentiator that I bring to the table is that I grew up on both sides of the track, right? My family got great opportunities with my parents. And so we lived in some really nice neighborhoods, but in the weekends and in the summertime, I had to go back to Big Mom and them house because my parents never wanted us to forget where we come from, what our communities look like. I remember my dad used to always say, I'm an outlier, I'm an exception, to the rule. And it wasn't saying that in arrogance, it was saying it in, I was one of the ones that was given an opportunity. And there's many of other people that come from our communities that are great. They're just not given that opportunity. And so what I would like to do is pick up the torch that my parents both left off and help give more access and propel more equity and give more exposure and barrier eliminations to communities that are suffering by not having it.
Thank you for sharing that, Toni. I think, so from my perspective, and for our audio listeners who don't know which gender neutral person this is, I am the white male in the group who, by and large, has had more privilege in this country than a lot of other demographics and, socioeconomic.
And everyone, Chris. And everyone, Poppy.
But and to that point, I think as an education thing, even for myself and the other white males or white listeners out here listening to this episode, is it wasn't honestly until my adult years that I really understood where where I came from, what that meant, and what other people had to go through that was a much different experience than mine. And also understanding that there are layers to getting to equity. A lot of, I think, corporations and stuff, they say, oh, we have diversity, we hit our diversity quotas, but you can be diverse without being inclusive, and you can also be inclusive without being equitable. And those are all layers. You have to not just have the demographic breakdown. You have to bring those people to the table, and then also create the pathways for those people to get to the table in the first place. And I just think it's important for, again, our not just to call out our white listeners, but anybody who grew up in a more privileged than the average person in America, because our country is very diverse. So more privileged than probably half the population or more, and it's just a very important thing to really, I think, learn the terminology, but also to listen to people, on either side of the tracks, and really form your own opinions. And to your point, bring in experts when your ignorance might be showing.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for that, Chris, right? Because you're right. I mean, I think that a lot of the DEI initiatives and programs are being shut down or questioned because a lot of times it's performative and it's not really delivering the impact that is expected when you bring into the fold that layer, right, of equity, because a lot of people just don't know what that looks like in real time and in different environments. And so please, Toni, tell us, how do you present, right, this this aspect of it, right, or this big pause to corporations or to the people that the organizations that you work with to say, okay, let's take a moment, right? And this is what's happening, right? And this is what it looks like, and this is what it's doing, versus where you need to be if you really want to not only profess that you're pushing and a champion of DEI, but actually delivering the goods. So what is that gap? You know, what does it look like when it's not really working? And then they're like, okay, we need to shut this down, right? Versus actually putting in the work and, you know, providing access exposure. What does that look like? If you could give us some examples, that would be great, because it would you know, it really helps present the case much better for why it should be done.
So I like to disrupt with data. I'm going to make a shirt of that, I'm sure, at some point. Disrupt with data, because the numbers don't lie. Many people are used to looking at data from median data points, right? And so median data points are widely used for recruitment. But per capita data is used for solutions, and it's based on per person. So the first thing that we have to do when we are approaching a situation is to normalize utilization of per capita data, because we're doing this to solve a problem. And this is what I mean by hiring an expert. As an economist, I understand the difference between the two and know when to use median or when to use per capita. So that's usually step one. Step two is really understanding that equity is filling a gap. That's what it is. So if you give all of us the same thing, but I can't access it, right? So it's available, but I can't access it because I don't have X, Y, or Z, then the equity is there to help with the access. The other point of equity is to balance out things. So if you have a situation where you have, you know, a group of, 10 groups of A, you have 3 groups of B and 1 group of C. Well, let's look at why do we only have 1 group of C? You know, what needs to happen in order to have more groups of C? What needs to happen in order to have more groups of B, so that we have 10 groups of A, 10 groups of B, and 10 groups of C? So now we have an equal and equitable layer in order to promote solutions where everyone has a voice, where everyone has a decision-making ability. That's really the 2 parts of what equity is. And so when we go in with our disruptive data, when we go in with looking at how does that data, show itself in the needs of equity. And then the third thing that we do, and this is really going to disrupt things, is at the American Way, we don't believe that DEI should be a position within your company. It should be an outsourced third-party hiring, because it's really hard sometimes to shake the table that's paying your salary, every week or whatever.
Wow.
So I'm sorry, y'all not gonna have me back. But
say it again.
I just have to
Say
be
it again.
real.
Yes.
Okay. At the American Way, we don't believe that DEI should be an employee position. It should be a compliance factor that is outsourced by a third-party company, because it's really hard to be put in a situation where you have to tell your employer what they're doing wrong and still expect them to pay you and not fire you. And I'm not saying that there aren't any companies out there like that where, your DEI staff or person can, be blatantly honest and say, hey, this is the situation, this is what's going on, this is what's being done, to propel this or to sustain it without retaliation. It takes a very special leader, right, to not allow their ego to kick in, or to not allow their defense mechanisms to kick in, when you're saying this is what's wrong. And this is why my business partner at the American Way is a mental health professional, because a lot of solving problems are psychological. And we have to look at pathologies of behavior as well. And this is why we, through our study, believe that DEI should be outsourced. It should be outsourced and done by companies like the American Way, where we have a contract. So if you don't like the data and you don't like what I'm saying, you can't fire me and you still have to pay me my money.
And at the very least, hear it out, right? And be
Exactly.
and how do you say, and step out of ignorance, right? Like going back to what Chris mentioned earlier, at least you'll know what you're supposed to be knowing, right? So that's great.
I think it's more of ego and defense. So when you look at race in our country, right? When you look at discrimination, when you look at bias, when you look at microaggression, all of that is housed in psychology, right? We feel like in this capitalist society, somebody's gonna own the business, somebody's gonna work at the business, and somebody is gonna patronize the business, right? If I'm helping my employees become business owners, then I'm not gonna have anybody to work at my business, right? And then where are the clients, right, or the customers? How are they going to patronize me if I don't have workers? That is the system that we're in. And so historically, the way that that's been is, well, we're going to antagonize, terrorize, put in dissension and everything that we can to have a specific group or groups of people be on the underbelly of our society. What I'm saying is I'm not going to disrupt our capitalist society. I'm not going to be a hypocrite, right? We all benefit from the capitalist society. What I'm saying is that certain groups of people shouldn't be the underbelly just because their skin tone is melanated and their hair texture is more coily. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, if I could offer or just some personal experience with where assuming that you understand within an organization of what you need to be doing from a equity standpoint or diversity standpoint, and it not going according to plan necessarily. As I was working for an arts nonprofit, an arts fund or organization that helped through competitive grants provide grants to arts organizations. And one of the initiatives when I first started was to start diversifying the arts community, which I was absolutely for. But while we had diversity within the organization, we didn't necessarily have experts in the space. And so we started opening up grants for diverse organizations to apply and, receive funding. But then all of a sudden when they were, people were all of a sudden like, well, hey, we went out into these communities. We were trying to open up the grants. How come nobody's applying? And found out that the application process really wasn't equitable for the organizations that, for the standards of the traditional nonprofits or whatever that were funded, that didn't necessarily have all the staff or didn't meet certain funding criteria or certain program criteria. And as a result, basically these communities were isolated or prevented from being able to apply based on that criteria. So then had to, again, bring in an expert to help us identify where the equity concerns were within the application process to then make that a more equal pathway. And just two little anecdotes that I always love from showing what happens when equity does work and also when equity isn't used correctly is in terms of like bringing people to the table that we mentioned. One that didn't go well, I know from history, was a certain American car manufacturer had a car called a Nova, and they started to try to sell it in South American countries, and were wondering why sales were not taking off at all. And had they had somebody at the table who was representative of the Spanish language, they would understand that nova in Spanish means no go. So that was obviously not a good sales pitch to South American countries, but one that did work out, which is interesting, is Kingsford Charcoal. So the big charcoal brand, one of the biggest ones, I think, in the U.S. They were at one point about to go under, basically go bankrupt. They were having difficulty with their sales and marketing, and they ended up bringing somebody of Hispanic descent into the boardroom. And that person was like, well, hey, why don't you, start marketing to Hispanic families who have like large barbecues and, large gatherings and cookouts and stuff. And that idea or notion to start marketing to the Hispanic community for these family events actually saved Kingsford Charcoal and made it what it is today as like probably the top name out there. But I just wanted to share those because those are like, for examples that people can visualize here of what it means to have successful equity or have, bring an expert, somebody who's representative of the community. And again, because even board members for the nonprofit and stuff, when we were trying to diversify that, it didn't necessarily mean that just because you were Black or Hispanic or Asian descent that you had knowledge of what people in that community were actually going through. There's a, the hey, I look like or sound like somebody of a certain area doesn't mean that I understand the needs of that community. And you're saying like the per capita data of what does that community actually need or represent. And if you're bringing people in just because they look like a certain role, doesn't mean that they actually can be representative of the community you're trying to reach out to through that person. Sorry, that was a long-winded.
No, it's true, right? And so then it goes back to connecting the dots from an economic standpoint on the why, right? On the why from a capitalist mindset, right, or approach. And I love what you're saying. I mean, this is the system that we have, right? And so then, what can be done to shift the minds and really connect the dots so people understand that you're going to win, right, from an economic standpoint, and this is what it looks like. And I'm glad that you brought it back to the dollars and cents, Chris, because people that look like you, right, the assumption is that that's the language they understand, right? It's like from a business standpoint, how does it benefit me? And so have you encountered that, Toni, in the work that you do, that, once you start implementing that, it's painful. I can imagine it's painful to do that shift. I mean, how long does it take? I'm sure it's different for every company and organization, but is it really painful to really get it right?
I wouldn't say that it's painful, but I think it's painstaking. In the process of reorganizing our thoughts as it relates to, first of all, when you say economy, many people don't even understand what the dynamics are to our economy, right? What is macro, micro, and socioeconomics? How are they all individualized? How do they all go together? And then how does everybody benefit from that dynamic, and how are people not, or groups not benefiting from that dynamic? Many people don't understand that because they're not an economist. So just starting from explaining that and educating that and training with that and doing speaking engagements of that is really step one. And it's really amazing when you do connect with people and they want to learn. They want to understand the why. They want to really look at what a strategic how looks like. I think there is pushback, though, when it comes to what the results will be of equity for all. And I think that's the part that's not necessarily painful for me, but it can be painful for the people that I am pitching to, or maybe the people that I am working with, that after they look at what this equity is going to do, for everyone, then that ego kicks in and it's like, you know, do I really want to be in a position where I'm not on top and I'm not the one that controls everything and everybody? And then that's where I deflect to my business partner, who's a mental health professional, to help them work out the psychology to that.
From that work, do you have any examples of, like, I guess, somebody who really struggled through that transition, but on the other side, realized what that benefit actually was, or came to really understand the purpose behind it?
One instance that I can share with that is there was a big issue with somebody that I was working with, a client, where they weren't their turnover rate was just really high, and it was with a medical firm, and they weren't understanding, like, why is the turnover rate so high? So immediately we went to HR to see, when, is it that people are quitting? Are they getting fired? Is there an exit interview? What is the feedback going on? And so what we found out is that the people were quitting. And then they weren't only just quitting, they were filing, things with the EEOC as well, right? So when we were able to we met with about 50 or so of the employees or the former employees from that company. And they said their working environment was toxic. And so we're like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean, a toxic working environment? Because that's relative. And they, mentioned things like when we're speaking to each other in our native tongue, they would hear these snide remarks and comments. And then it got to a point to where, well, you can only speak English in here. And so I said, well, how did that make you feel, right? How did that make you feel? How is that, toxic? And they says, well, it made me feel dumb because I really don't understand a lot of the higher faluting words in English. And so we would speak in our native tongue with each other, right? Because we could understand how to get the job done better in our native tongue. But some of the words in English were a little bit tricky for them, right? And that was the issue. And so I said, well, that's not a toxic thing. That is a miscommunication. And so it was just really wonderful that we were able to meet and collect that per capita data again, right? Mm-hmm. To see what the problem is, what is the why. And then we were able to take that feedback back to that employer. And the employer winded up hiring back about 30 or so of the previous employees that had quit. The complaints that were filed were dropped, and it was, a happy rainbow ending for everybody. And the employer, what they started doing is they even changed a lot of their materials and things like that into different dialects, because at the end of the day, it's about getting the job done and creating great work performance environments for everybody. And that too is American.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad that you gave this example actually with healthcare, because, human dignity is also attached to that, even from the perspective of the patient experience, right? And there's something to be said when you have a diverse workforce. Generally, it means that you're serving a diverse community, right? And so having people that are proficient in the native languages of the community that you're serving, of your customers, is very compelling and attractive for people that prefer to speak in their original language, right? Or their language of preference. In my case, it's Spanglish, right? Or sometimes even rubbish, right? I say that I'm trilingual. I speak English, Spanish, and rubbish. But anyway, but where I'm getting at is it's like having that moment, right, to pause and at least the attitude or being open to receiving this feedback and going through this exercise, which I'm sure takes some time, right? Because you have to engage with people that are disgruntled and like, oh, I'm done. I'm like totally done. But then to get that honest feedback and be able to deliver it, I think there's so much value to that, and also it helps the families that once left, right? Now that they have their jobs back, they're feeling good. They feel like that they're heard, and I feel that it boosts loyalty. And these are things that improve production and outcomes and the profit margins, right? Increase the profit margins. But I love how you have the mental health person on your team or your partner, because I never thought of it that way, right? That you need that, because a lot of this is just a mental game, right? It's like a rewiring of how you approach things. And so that's really, really cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like a lot of migrant communities are oftentimes completely overlooked and not plugged into progress and to the things that are happening in their local communities. And so it's a good way to demonstrate how you can adjust couple of adjustments, right? How open are people to in leadership in these companies or organizations in terms of reallocating resources? Because you mentioned before control. It's all, at the end of the day, it's control and power, right? And giving that up can be traumatic for people that have had it all the time. And so please take us behind the curtain and tell us what that conversation looks like.
The conversations I will give you on both sides. So for me, it's great, right? It's why I started my company. I love having critical, courageous conversations. I love doing that, right? However, for the stakeholders and decision makers, because that's ultimately who we're looking at to be our clientele demographic, it can be quite uncomfortable for them because they're having to face these truths that have been brushed under the rug for a long time. A truth in that situation, the example I gave was that one of the main differences that changed that outcome was the fact that I am African American. And a lot of the employees that had quit were of Black descent. So some of them were from Haiti, some of them were from the DR, some of them were from Cuba, but they were, melanated like me. They looked like me and they saw themselves in me. And so their defenses were down and we could actually talk and have a conversation. And I think that truth was hard sometimes for the decision makers to accept, because we live in a society where the one with all the gold makes all the rules, and the ones with all the gold who makes all the rules are usually Caucasian. And because we live in a society where Caucasian people do not have to understand other cultures outside of their own, it is sometimes hard for them to relate and to really understand the heart posture and the environmental situation and the financial plight that a lot of these other communities have, because it's so far away, or either it's something that they never experienced being now a decision maker and a stakeholder. And what I try to tell people in those positions is that you have three types of capital. You have financial capital, intellectual capital, and social capital. And just because you have the financial capital doesn't always mean you have the intellectual capital or the social capital. And just because you have the intellectual capital doesn't mean you have the financial capital or the social capital. And just because you have social capital doesn't mean you have intellectual capital or financial capital. And so we need to learn to work together and benefit from the strengths of each other. And oftentimes, if they'll really look into, this is an area of weakness for me, right? Let me hire out for my weaknesses. And then let me have enough psychological strength and enough self-awareness to not get offended when the American way gives me my report for correction.
And if you do, there's a therapist for that.
Exactly.
And I just want to touch on real quick, because I don't remember if we said this before the recording or after or during, but you had mentioned that you are not, with the American way, it's not about changing the system or destroying the system and rebuilding a whole new one. It is providing equitable pathways to give everybody access to that same system. Which I think might be helpful for some people to just wrap their head around, that it's not like a complete, in some cases it can be more, drastic of a change than others, but in most cases it is, how do you make your business better? And I think if you are in a leadership position or a community leadership position, you probably got there from having mentors and people you could rely on, and from educating yourself and business help and self-help situations. And this is just another extension of that to say, like, to your point, it's if it's a weakness of yours, then this is a way you can bring somebody in to help you with that. And I think also, and again, speaking from a white male perspective, I think there's sometimes a lot of pressure of what if I get this wrong? As the white male, if I implement a diversity, DE&I practices within my workplace and really try to make it happen, and I do it the wrong way or say something the wrong way, that it could, tarnish an entire reputation. But that's why, the American way exists, to bring in that expert, to not have to do it yourself, to not do what the nonprofit that I worked for did, where they tried to do it within and then realized that, the entire application process was inequitable. So I think it's just, it doesn't have to be as scary as everybody thinks it is. If you are bringing in the right people, it's showing that you have the intention to change and to be better for your workforce and for your vendors and your clients and customers. And it's just, another improvement of yourself as a leader or, as a company, to, again, just really be about the people and serve the people. And in turn, your business will probably be fruitful as a result of that. So I guess, is there any ways that you kind of try to ease the minds of somebody who you are pitching this to, or who finds out about you and is asking questions, to kind of let them know that it's okay, and that but they will be held accountable, but you will hold their hand through the process? How do you navigate that?
So what we do is we're solution-based in everything that we do. Whenever we're talking with a client, whenever we're pitching a proposal to them, it's all solution-based and ROI. Because at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society, right? And so we also have to show them why this is important for your bottom line. Like the example that I gave, when you have to keep rehiring people, right? That's going to slow down productivity versus having people there that are staying with you and have longevity. Having diversity in your employees will be a huge reflection, and you having diversity within your customer or clientele demographic as well. So we always present it as solution-based. However, when we look at things like, for example, how many of our companies have Black owned and Black operated companies that they have contracts with?
Mhm.
That's a hard conversation when you're Caucasian to be faced with that. How many, people that are in your C-suite, right, are Black or are Hispanic or are Asian, right? When you look at really inputting those equitable measures, doing it is easy, right? If we tap into our humanity, right, that makes sense, right? It's nothing should be one-sided. We should always have balance in everything that we do, right? However, there is ego, right? There's ego. There's a psychology to, opening this space to people that have been othered to you your whole life, right? This is an other culture. This is an other ethnicity. And when that has been put into your brain and now you're in a position of power where you can uplift an individual or uplift a community with your pen, because sometimes the pen is stronger than the sword, and you're not doing that, then that's a psychology that goes into self-awareness and how you view other people and giving other people opportunities with the position that you have. And that can be hard for people. And I'm not a mental health professional. I'm the data girl, but my business partner is really good about being solution-based too in mental health and tackling those courageous conversations in a way that's empowering for everybody.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm just thinking as I hear you talk about representation and not having it, right, at the C-suite and in the different levels, of an organization, that in the very near future, I mean, we're talking, and again, going back to the data, the census says by 2045, I think it is, that's kind of like the tipping point where we're going to have a new global majority here in the US. And so it makes you think there's this time frame where we kind of need to be catching up, because that's the pipeline, right, of workers, of leaders, and it's very, very diverse. And so we need to nurture and cultivate the new generation of leaders, because they're going to be running this joint, like all, they're going to be running it all, right? And so the shift, it's good to have these, it's like almost like an intervention, right? Now, so it's like you can have the foundation and create an environment where you can ease into having, more diverse approach into everything. So you're right. So it's not a department, that's the DEI. It's that thing over there that those people over there do, but it has to literally be embedded into the way you operate as part of the American way, because it is the freaking American way, right?
Yes. It's done. I won you over, Sammy. Yes. And that's what we do. Just in this conversation, it is the American way. It's our America. And how can we use our collective and individual sense of humanity to propel equity for all? Truly.
Love it.
I feel like I could hear you speak and learn from you for hours. We definitely have to have you back to talk about whatever you want. Listen, Toni, you can pick any topic and then we'll just go. We'll say, let's go. But this was such a wonderful, enlightening conversation. And I don't want to speak for you, Chris, but I will. We're both we're both thankful that you made time to, give us this perspective, and really show us, right, that the American way, it might not, it's actually not shabby at all. It's just that it needs to be tweaked, and we need a tip knucking and a nicking, right? It's like a little bit of a surgery, to it, right? Any parting words that you would like to share, and how can we reach you?
You can reach me at theamericanway333.com. You can reach me at Toni Hunt on LinkedIn. And you can also reach me at The American Way on LinkedIn as well. And I want to leave you with this. Each and every one of us has a platform, and each and every one of us has power. I am asking all of us to use our powerful platforms to propel equity and to give exposure to all and eliminate the barriers to access, because that's the American way.
Boom. Mic drop.
Totally. Thank you so much, Toni. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and just thank you so much. And I'm going to call you so we can do lunch.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Sammy and Chris. And everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Toni.
Thank
Bye.
you.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. Thank you for tuning in, and tell your friends to find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to show up and speak up.